So here's a little background info about my family. We bought our house 3 years ago when my son was one. He started talking really well right after he turned two. His speech went from being 1 to 2 words at a time to short but complete sentences and phrases. I also quit my job away from home to work from home around this time in order to be able to stay with him 24/7. I started teaching English online and nannying a little boy. This is important because the little boy helps validate my son's experiences. I noticed my son has always stared and waved at nothing, and all the other creepy shit babies do. This is different. One day he started randomly looking down the hallway and whining and crying. I asked him what he was crying about and he said, "It's scary." So I asked him what was scary and he said, "The bear." At this point, I thought maybe he saw one of his stuffed animals in his room that scared him, and he was remembering it, because you can't actually see into his room from the hallway. So I asked, "Honey, what does the bear look like?" He stared at the same spot for a minute and said, "It's big and black." Unlike a lot of other people, I'm not a skeptic, and I've had a lot of paranormal experiences in my life. So I immediately believed him. He started crying again and ran back towards me. Fast forward like a week, and he's been doing this every day. One day, I was watching the little boy I nannied, and he started creeping around the hallway looking at something. My son looked at the exact same spot, and they simultaneously started crying. They both ran to me. This is when I asked my son where it was. He pointed to the hallway. I couldn't see anything, and after a minute he pulled on my dress and said, "Mommy, they're in there now," talking about the room that was my office back then. So I held both of their hands and walked towards my room. They let go and we got there. I went inside the room and again couldn't see anything. Meanwhile, they wouldn't go in there. Instead, they were peering around the doorway crying. Honestly, whatever the thing was starting to piss me off because sparing my baby and his friend was not cool. I had my mom come over a few days later and we did a cleansing with sage. We also used a candle that you're supposed to blow out at the end to complete the ritual. My mom asked my son to blow it out since the activity seemed to be centered around him. He tried to do it about 5 times and the flame would flicker but never go out. So we redid the cleansing and he was able to blow it out that time. He saw the bear again every few weeks or months, and we'd do a cleansing each time and it would go away, temporarily. My son is 4 now, and he would still randomly mention the bear, especially if he's scared before bed. He'll say something like, "Are you sure there are no monsters? Not even the bear?" I have a 1-year-old daughter now, and her bedroom is the same room that used to be my office. She'll randomly say, "Hey," to nothing and stuff like that, just like my son did. I'm not looking for advice because I'm pretty used to this kind of stuff. Just thought I'd share. So in Nevada, there's a little park, and below this is Robb Canyon. And it's a pretty big canyon. Now this place is just creepy overall. The only dead tree in the area stops the river flow. Residents that live near it act strange, like they're out of a Black Mirror episode, like we're outsiders. It's been claimed to be the most haunted place in the West. There's some background to this location. Alright, so the story begins this last year in July, when me and my friends got to Robb Canyon to give our final say on if it's haunted. But this time we were checking out the park. Upon our arrival, we see a glimmer of something in the light to stumble across one swing, just swinging by itself. Now this is creepy and all, but we put it aside. My homie goes to the bathroom and I see him pull a large stick out between the door and the frame. For some reason he knocked on it and I thought it was stupid. But as he was walking back, he dead froze and then ran over to me. He says the door knocked back. So following this, about 5 minutes later, we heard a very loud go. And being noticeably freaked out, we still stayed. Suddenly, we're being quiet to try and hear the voice, and we heard a female moan bellow through the canyon, followed by that same go. About 3 years ago, I lived with my best friend and one of our other friends. Everything was pretty average. Haunting stuff, the Ouija board. My friends never said goodbye and didn't tell me until after I moved in. Rude. The man on the stairs, and the horrible nightmares. To me, this is all pretty average inside this house. But this friend of ours was at a whole new level. I'll call him Friend B. It started when he tried to learn tarot and other tricks of his trade, including but not related to black magic. So one day, our friend leaves and she goes to snoop in Friend B's room. Now, originally, I didn't think that was okay and thought she was being paranoid until she brought me the notebook. Our names, our old friends, and a bunch of pages with weird symbols written furiously in pencil. The kind of symbols you see in your average witchcraft TV show or summoning circles. A pentacle that was made of a broken stick frame and hemp string, one for each of us. Our names in the middle like a dream catcher for your soul. Now, this was all really freaking weird, but we got his stuff and got it out really quickly. Later, upon investigating and cleaning the room, I find a jar filled with the nails and pins I lent to Friend B. But inside this glass jar wasn't just the nails, but animal bones that looked like they'd been broken up to fit inside, as well as a very strange greyish and thick liquid. It smelled absolutely foul, and when I showed it to Grandma, she freaked out, asked me where I found it, and then explained that the metal draws out the liquid from the bones. What the F? Has anyone heard of this practice? I can't find anything about it, and to this day, I don't understand. Grandma didn't give many details behind what it was used for. I don't know what someone would want with something so putrid like that. In case you're wondering, we were good friends, but Friend B got drunk and admitted he hated me, and I quote, having too many things in common. About 3 years ago, my girlfriend at the time and myself took a 2-week-long trip to Japan. The original plan was to visit her grandmother, a survivor of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima, her dad's family, and take a much-needed vacation from a job that could really care less about me. Her father, who had moved to the US in his teens, had always asked about my family history. As a fourth-generation Japanese-American with no remaining family in the first or second generations, most of my family history has been lost with the deceased. I would ask my father and his cousins about where our family was from, and if we had any relatives back in Japan, but the answers I would get would be vague at best. I'd get answers like, your great-grandfather and eldest granduncle went back to Japan to help rebuild after the war, and that it was thought that we were from the Hiroshima area. No one in my remaining family sought to keep in contact with those who went back. So my ex's father would spend his free time doing research and share information he could dig up about my family. He found that my family originated in the Wakayama, a city just south of Kobe and Osaka area, and what the kanji for my last name looks like. Unfortunately, before we could make the trip, my ex's grandmother had passed away after a long fight with cancer. Eventually, the time came for us to spend some time in Japan, touring everywhere from Osaka to Tokyo, all the way down to Yamaguchi and Hiroshima. We spent most of our vacation bouncing from hotel to hotel in major cities, sightseeing places like the Tokyo Skytree and the deer that bow in Nara. Being the nerd that I am, I forced us to make stops to see the Unicorn Gundam and Akihabara that my ex had little to no interest in. Totally worth it in my opinion. Our trip finished off with a long Shinkansen, or bullet train, ride to Hiroshima where we would spend an early morning seeing some of the buildings still standing after the A-bomb and the World War II Museum. After that, we would take a trip into the rural areas outside of the city to stay at her grandparents' home, where we would meet her uncles and their families, who took care of us for the rest of the trip. Her uncle picked us up from the end of the line, which both the train and the station were pretty run down, and took us by car a few more hours to my ex-grandparents' home. By the time we arrived, we were able to unpack and get situated with some daylight left to kill before we'd get dinner. Now, if you've ever been to rural Japan, go. It's awesome, as the homes that are there look like something out of old samurai movies. or are uninhabited and look like they belong in a horror movie. So I suggested we walk around a bit to stretch our legs, as we've been travelling most of the day. She agreed, and we began walking down the narrow country roads. As we were walking, occasionally jumping across deep gutters to allow cars to pass, she told me about an old shrine that sits atop a hill on the edge of a forest that she had visited with her grandparents years ago. Before I get any further, I feel it's important to mention that my ex is extremely superstitious, and I'm not. I also consider myself to be fairly perceptive, some may say paranoid, compared to her. Habitually, I'll notice things that are out of place or, for lack of a better term, feel when something is off. Mostly these things come into play when I'm outside, and I can spot hidden animals or edible plants back home. That being said, I don't go looking for trouble in the realm of shit I can't explain, just in case. But I figure exploring should be fun. It's still light out. I'm in a rural town that I'll probably never visit again, and I've always craved adventure, thinking it will be like the beginning of a video game. So about 20 minutes into our little exploration, we come to a large, unpainted and rotted torii. Those large orange Japanese gateways I'm sure you've seen. And maybe a couple hundred stairs leading uphill into a forest where the shrine is located. Staring up at the steps, something felt off, but I figured it was just the nervous excitement of exploring. I have a fairly athletic build, but my ex was a bit on the chubby side. So as we were making the climb up, she told me she needed a break, but to go ahead as she could tell I was excited. Double checking to make sure she was okay with me going on without her, I continued to race up the stairway. Once I reached the top, the sun had begun to set, painting the clearing on top of the hill in a beautiful orange hues. There were a couple decrepit buildings atop the hill, the shrine, which had been locked up, and path cleared of fallen leaves, which seemed out of place, that led deeper into the forest. This is where things started to feel outright wrong. The first thing I noticed was that at some point, it became eerily quiet. No cicadas, no birds, not even a breeze rustling the branches in the forest. I cautiously walked around looking between the boards that made up the walls of the shrine, trying my best to wait for my ex to catch up. That's when I heard it. If it hadn't been so quiet, I probably wouldn't have noticed. But on the other side of the hill across from the stairs, a quick rustle of dead leaves on the ground behind the shrine. I quickly focused my attention in that direction and peeked around the corner of the shrine. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement. Calling out, "Hello?" I made my way over to the back of the shrine and looked down the hill, hoping it wasn't a person who slipped and fell. Nothing. I scanned the small valley, calling out, "Hello? Anyone there?" In hindsight, it probably should have been called out in Japanese. The forest remained still. After a few moments, I relaxed, thinking a branch had fallen and I was just being paranoid. Then, off to the left of where I was looking for more rustling leaves, I caught another glimpse of it. It was big, maybe 5 or 6 feet long, pure white and ungodly fast. There was no way I would have missed something that large or white when I was looking down in the valley. It seemed to just appear out of nowhere. Quickly, it bolted behind a small bush and a tree growing next to each other, and again, there was only silence. Without breaking eye contact, I called out for my ex, hoping she was close to the top of the stairs and could verify what I saw. Nothing. I called for her again. Still nothing. So I waited, my gaze on the bush and tree that whatever this thing was slid behind. I debated whether I should throw something towards it, but was way too unfamiliar with Japan's wildlife to feel safe enough to do so. I didn't want to piss off something I couldn't take in a fight. Waiting for my ex to peek over the staircase, I was fixated on the bush, hoping I could identify whatever that thing was. As my nerves calmed, I came to realize that something that large and white couldn't completely hide in a bush that small. Feeling really uncomfortable, I slowly backed away from the edge of the hill and went to find my ex. She was about 20 steps from the top when I told her we needed to leave and that I had seen something. The look she gave me was one of doubt as she went behind the shrine to look and saw nothing. She continued to look around for a few minutes, when she said we could leave as we made our way back down the stairs. As we descended the hill, I could feel something watching us, stalking us. We made our way back through the town down the narrow, dimly lit roads, as I'd occasionally looked behind us and into the surrounding areas, hoping that it wasn't some predator preparing to attack. After returning to her grandparents' house, we ate dinner with her family and went to bed. That whole night, I couldn't sleep. I could still feel something watching us, a feeling that I carried with me until we left the town. After returning home, I began trying to look up animals in Japan that would fit the description of what I saw. When I realised that there was pretty much nothing that matched the description of what I could find, I started investigating more paranormal entities. Still, I couldn't find anything. If anyone knows what this thing may have been, I would appreciate it. It's haunted me for 3 years and made me nervous about exploring, which I'd like to be comfortable enough to do again someday.
This happened to me just last night. And although I still can't wrap my mind around what happened to me, I thought, why not put this out there and see if anyone else has had an experience like this as well. So I'm a hobbyist photographer and I enjoy astrophotography. So being winter, the sky usually clears up real nice, late night. So I grabbed my camera gear and headed out of town looking for the right spot. Exploring different areas is part of the fun. So I'm in my car and I head down this dirt road, losing some satellite reception, and I'm getting fuzz, thinking nothing of it. I switched to FM, still fuzz, and AM, nothing. It was a little strange, so I turned off the radio and kept heading down. I saw a couple of red lights ahead of me. They were tail lights from another vehicle down the road. I was approaching it pretty quickly, and I thought this car might be lost or just going really slow. So as I was approaching, I couldn't have been more than a couple meters away, to the point where my headlights would have given me a better visibility of the type of vehicle. And all of a sudden, it was gone. In all sense of the word, it vanished. Not fade away, just blink of an eye. I was left in shock. I didn't immediately see what was really ahead of me. It was an end of a road sign right in front of me. I slammed on my brakes. Luckily, it was a dirt road, and there was very little snow or ice on the road. So I didn't slip, but it was still a close call. I got out to see for myself, and sure enough, just past the sign of a drop-off to a small riverbank. If I was going any faster or if it was slippery, I would have gone down and maybe died. Just the thought of it still gives me chills. If that wasn't enough, when I get back inside my car and start heading back, not 2 or 3 kilometers driving, I see headlights coming down the road. So to warn the car in front of me, I start flashing my lights. Still approaching and not fazed by my lights, I start to honk my horn and flashing my lights. And he's pretty much beside me, and his lights are on high beam, almost blinding as it gets closer. As he's passing me, I hear the roar of his engine clear as day. So I look back to see him, and again, nothing. No car lights. I went home and didn't take any photos. There was no way I was going to stop again. I barely got any sleep that night. I just can't explain it. Anyone have a similar experience and want to share? I'd like to hear your stories. So I was laid off work for a couple of months and was lucky enough to find something temporary as a custodian at my in-laws' school. So for the last week or so, I've been having strange occurrences while working. I can go in at my own time and finish whenever, which works out for me. I prefer to work alone anyways. So I started to go in at around 8 PM and finished at around midnight or so. For the first few nights, nothing happened. My work would set the alarm and lock up behind me. Then one night, about a week and a half ago, I started to hear some noises from down the hall steps. Now I was sure I was alone, but with the alarm deactivated, anyone with a key could come in, a teacher or another one of the custodians. So I could hear them step down the hall, getting louder, closer to the room I was in. And when it sounded like someone would have been right at the door, it just stopped. So I look out the door and down the halls and call out. No response. I was a little freaked out, but I just brushed it off. Later that night, I went into another classroom and immediately felt strange, a little lightheaded, and it was cold. Right as you walk in, you can feel the temperature drop, but it was an eerie feeling I had. I started cleaning, wiping down the desks, and putting them in the corner since there was no more school. As I was putting away the last desk, I noticed one of the desks was in the opposite corner of all the others. So I moved it back and went to grab the mop and bucket that was outside the classroom door. And as I walked back in, I noticed the desk back in the same corner. I left the room and turned the lights off, closed the door, and left the building. I was scared, and I know I was alone. But as I exited the building and headed towards my car, I saw the room I was in, lights are on, and I could see a woman there clear as day, looking right at me. I was not going back in there that night. I let several days go by. I was finishing up all the other classrooms and I would constantly hear footsteps down the hall. My cleaning supplies would be moved from one place to another and I could feel like there was someone watching me. It was so uncomfortable. Just last Friday was my last day. I only had 2 rooms left. The one I ran out of and the adjacent room. So I started with the adjacent room. Nothing weird about it, until I was just about done. I could hear a faint cry or moaning coming from the hall. And all I can think of was, you've got to be kidding me. My hair stood up and froze. I'm about to leave the room, but there was no way I was going to go out and into the hall, hearing someone crying. It was 5 minutes, I just stood there listening. I finally decided it's now or never. I grabbed my cleaning supplies and headed out the room. Just one step into the hallway, and it stopped. Relieved, I turned and locked up the classroom door. The classroom I've been avoiding was untouched except the one desk. I was in and out with no further incidents, thankfully. I was done with my work, never needing to go back. I had my mother-in-law over for dinner, and she works as a teacher at that same school, so I asked her if she's ever had any strange things happen to her, and she said, oh yes, she's had a lot of them. Then she tells me that there was a cemetery that was moved about 12 years ago that was visible right from the kids' park. And since the move, there have been strange happenings in and around the school grounds. So I told her what happened to me while working there, and she started crying. I wasn't sure why, but she gathered herself up and told me that about 10 years ago, that was her class. And around that time, she had an EA teacher's assistant. She committed suicide in that classroom. She hanged herself, and it was my mother-in-law that found her the next morning. I made my mother-in-law cry when I described the woman I saw in the shadow. I felt horrible, but at the same time, I was sad. I probably shouldn't have been afraid, but what can I do? Knowing what I know, I might go back one day. So this story goes back many years ago, and it was brought up while talking to my family over the weekend. It definitely took me back, and it brought chills just talking about it. I know this was not just myself who experienced it, so I've put more validity to this story. It was a shared experience. I was about 7 or 8 years old, and my dad was the choir director of our church. We had about 20 or so people in the group. My mom, aunt, uncle, and a couple of my cousins. We would practice usually in the middle of the week after work hours at the church, and it was like any other choir practice. I would sit on the benches with a radio and a mic plugged into it. My job was to record them singing, so I would move from bench to bench recording them, getting different ankles and playing the tape back so they would see how they sound. So after doing this about 3 times already that night, it was the last song. The group was going to practice. I moved to the farthest bench at the very back of the church and hit record. It was all good a couple times. I had to stop recording, then start blunders and laughter. The usual stuff when practicing. It was the very last recording session. Everything was perfect. I stopped recording and went to go play what they just sang to the choir. We all huddled around and, like I said, perfect. Until it got to the end. You could hear a faint laughter at the end. It was creepy to say the least. My dad stopped the tape, hit rewind, and played the ending again with the volume raised. Sure enough, there was a deep, low sounding laughter in the background. Everyone froze. It was dead silent. And just to be sure it wasn't some flaw in the tape, he played it back again. It was still there. He stopped the tape, but the laughter continued. That's right after the tape stopped, you can hear the same laughter. It was sinister, and we can hear it echoing through the church. We all heard it, and we didn't stay much longer. We packed up our stuff and got out of there. I asked my dad whatever happened to the tape, and he said he got rid of it. It's too bad, but maybe it's for the best. Whatever that laughter was, I sure won't forget about it anytime soon. It kept me up all night last night just thinking about it, and I still got the chills. This is a fairly recent incident that has me unnerved at work. I'm a parts assistant manager at a dealership. I work close every day, and I'm the only one who works the counter for the last hour or so. Strange things happen all the time, mostly noises at the back of parts. Nothing too crazy. I figure it's just my imagination half the time. Sometimes parts will fall off the shelves, and it'll spook me a little, and I'll brush it off. Well, just last week, I was alone getting caught up on some paperwork because we're short-staffed at the moment. So it was just myself left after 6 p.m. All the salesmen left, and I know there's nobody left in the building. Lights are off, except in parts, obviously. So it's about 7:30 or 8 when I hear a large bang on the floor on top of me. There are parts stored at the second level, most of which we don't sell, so they're stored at the far back. The lights have never worked at the far back, no matter how many times we've had electricians fix them. Anyways, I get up from behind my desk to go look. Now it's completely dark up there, but it's still kind of spooky. As I head up the stairs, I hear this large bang again. I did pause for a second, but rushed up the last steps and headed to the back. I didn't see anything, but it got cold, and I had a chill running up my back. There was nothing out of place on the floor or anything that had been moved or shifted from the shelves. It was all normal. I know there's no one here, and the switches are downstairs near my desk. My heart stops and I pull out my cell phone and turn the flashlight on. I find my way to the stairs and start heading down. As I'm getting to the last step, I can hear footsteps coming from upstairs and behind me. I was not about to look, so I ran back to where the light switch was, and I can hear the steps running. As I did, I flipped the switch, turn around, and see nothing. I wasn't staying there any longer. I packed up my stuff, turned my computer on, set the alarm, and I was out of there. The whole time trying to explain the experience away, but I couldn't think of anything. I don't think I'll be staying late at work if I don't have to for a while. It started about 2 weeks ago, with small things here and there. A knocking noise here and footsteps there. Nothing for me to be too worried about. I was usually alone until my wife started to hear things too. When she was alone and when we were together. I started to get more attentive about it when I brought my 9-year-old a new tablet, not even 4 days old. My family and I were all downstairs watching a movie when we heard a loud crash from upstairs. It startled us a little, so I went up to go see what it was. I looked around and found my daughter's brand new tablet on the ground, smashed and face up too. It wasn't the only thing either. She had a couple of trinkets and plushies laying in the middle of the floor. Now from where it fell off, I had to assume was a small bedside table she has. I was definitely more upset than scared, but now I had my radar up. It started ramping up, the knocking and the footsteps around my house. And as an added bonus, my youngest daughter of 3 was starting to talk to something more often and shouting, "Stop it," or "Don't do that." Then one day I was looking after my aquarium that sits in my living room, and my 3-year-old was playing with her toys in the middle of the hall, and I had a clear view of her in a bedroom from where I was standing. If you can imagine looking straight down the hall and looking into her room, the first thing you'll see is her bed. And somewhat on top of her bed, she has a fort or teepee, if you will. Anyways, as I was cleaning the tank out, the corner of my eye, I see the teepee start typing over its side. I look up from what I was doing and it looked like it was going to fall over. That's when my 3-year-old turns and looks into her room and shouts, "Stop that!" And it goes back to its original position. I had chills. I grabbed her and said it was okay. I asked her what she saw and who it was. She was screaming at all she said was, "It was the monster, Daddy." And that was the last straw with me. It was just on Monday, it was about 10 p.m, and my wife had just put both kids to bed. My littlest one will come in and out of her room to ask for some juice or milk, or she needs to pee or anything, so she can stay up a little longer. It was just what she does. We're used to it. Well, this night, after many times of her getting out of bed, we finally got her down, or so we thought. My wife and I were sitting on the couch watching TV when we started to hear the door handle of her room jiggle, so we knew she was awake and about to come out. But she didn't. The door kept opening and closing, not fully, but just enough to hear it unhinge and close again and again. We paused the show we were watching just to make sure, and sure enough, it was her door open and close again and close. I was upset, and I got up quietly to go in and surprise her and catch her in the act to tell her to go to sleep. As I approached the door, I could clearly see, so I timed it to when it would be back to the open position. So all I had to do was push the door. It was not my daughter. The door flung open and my daughter was in bed, covered in her sheets, and she looked at me. I was stunned to say the least. I knew it wasn't her. I asked her, "Were you playing with the door?" I knew it wasn't her, but I wanted to see what her response was, and she told me yet again, "It was the monster, Daddy." She slept in our bed that night. Like I said, I had enough, so that same night after my wife got my daughter settled into our bed, I went back into her room and decided to confront whatever this entity that was in my home and in my daughter's room. And I had the light on, went to the center of the room and told the spirit that it was not welcome in my house. I didn't want it here and that it did not belong here. I ordered it to leave in a firm voice as if I knew there was something there. I wasn't scared, just upset about the whole situation. As I was speaking, the lights in her room started to flicker on and off. It didn't stop. I kept repeating myself over and over again until it stopped. Not sure how long it lasted, but when it did stop, I prayed. There hasn't been any more activity since, but I'm still watching, listening, and waiting with hopes that whatever was there is gone. If anyone has some suggestion on what else I should try, please let me know. I don't want whatever was there to come back. So this account happened several years ago. I was 18 at the time, and my father asked me if I wanted to make a little extra money. Of course, I said yes, and he got this contract from a school for the summer to clean and get ready for next year. He had other jobs to do, so I helped him with this one, and of course, he would pay me for the work I did. I had worked a couple of nights with my dad. He would tell me what to do and where to go, just to get me familiar with the school and show me what keys open what doors. So once I had that down, he would leave me to go do other work while I would stay at the school. I had a morning job and so did my dad, so he would go later at night, like at 8 or 9 to start. And depending on how quickly we did the job, I would usually be done at 1 or 2 in the morning. Anyways, this school was big, with 3 floors, 2 gyms, and several offices, and a small chapel too. There were crosses everywhere and pictures of Jesus, of course, and I never felt uncomfortable. But this one night, I had just finished waxing one of the gym floors, and I was alone that one night. My dad would come back and pick me up later. It was about 11:30, and like I said, I had just finished the gym. I was walking down the hallway back to the janitor room to get more supplies, when I heard the gym door close behind me, scaring the crap out of me. I knew I had propped the door open, but I paid no mind to it. I just went back, opened the door again, and popped it open again, making sure it wouldn't slam shut. Nothing else happened for the next half hour or so, till I heard someone call my name. It was faint at first, like at a distance, I thought it was my dad. So I waited till I heard my name being called out again. It was much clearer this time, and it did sound like my dad. I yelled back, "I'm in the office," and I kept cleaning, waiting for him to come my way. And I waited like 5 minutes, but he never came. So I dropped what I was doing and I yelled again, "Dad, I'm in the office, cleaning," as I was walking down the hallway where I heard him calling me from. That's when I realized it couldn't be him. The doors are locked, so no one without a key can get in, and I had all the keys with me. I checked my pocket just to confirm, and sure enough, the bunch of them were there. As soon as that happened, I grabbed my cell phone and called my dad to see if maybe he was yelling from the outside in. I get a hold of him and ask him if he was finished with his other job. He tells me he's just finishing up and will be there in 30 minutes. My heart sank and my blood ran cold. I said, "Okay, I'll see you," and then I hung up. I tried hard not to think about it as I returned to the office to continue working. Aside from the strange noises here and there, what really got me were the voices, specifically the mimicking of my dad's voice. The next time I heard my dad's voice, I was working in one of the washrooms. I was just finishing up the mopping of the floors, and I had the door held open by the bucket. As I was exiting the bathroom and moving the bucket away from the door, I could clearly hear his voice say my name from inside the washroom. There was no way it was him. I didn't hesitate to walk right in and look for him. I opened every stall just to make sure, and of course, there was nobody. This school had a small sanctuary, and in this sanctuary it had a statue of the Virgin Mary, and several pictures of Jesus on the cross. Nothing that would creep anyone out, I would think. But this one time, when I was repolishing the seats, I could swear someone or something was watching me. I was unsettled. I kept looking behind me, never seeing anybody there. But I did notice one thing. The statue was in a slightly different position than before. Believe me or not, I know it had moved. Originally, the Virgin Mary had her head positioned downwards and to the right of her shoulders, eyes closed. But when I saw her eyes open on one of the times I looked behind me, I knew something was different. Not only that, but her head was more raised and centered, as if she was looking right at me. I was so uncomfortable and just plain freaked out about it that I dropped what I was doing and left. There was no way I was going back there, and I did tell my dad that I never went back in there. And every time I'd walk by there, I could hear the organ that was in there playing. But that was only after the statue occurred. Now, it could have been automated. I kept telling myself, but I wasn't going to check. I started bringing my MP3 with me and listening to my own music. Of course, I told my dad about the strange happenings, and he never questioned it. I asked him if anything similar ever happened, and he would say he would hear noises and people talking as well, but he would just brush it off and keep working. On the last day that I would work there, my father and I finished up and started making sure all the doors were locked. We started to head to the main entrance, and I held the door open while my dad started inputting the security code. When he finished and closed and headed my way, he closed the door, and we both heard the organ just blasting. It startled the both of us. It was so loud it echoed through the halls. We stood there just for a second and turned around, making our way back to the car. I was so relieved that I would never set foot inside that school ever again. This happened to me just a couple of days ago. Like most of the people in the world, my cell phone is permanently attached to their hands, as was mine. I keep it charged all day long, and when the battery runs low, I plug it in. Except on weekends, I don't like to be bothered. So most weekends, from Friday till about Sunday evening, my phone will be dead and it'll stay that way until I plug it back in on Sunday. Well, this last Friday, my wife and kids were gone for the weekend and I was home alone. No surprise there. Anyways, after work at about 6, when I got home, I had about 15% life left on my phone. And my wife knows I won't charge my phone for the weekend. And if she wants to get a hold of me, she could send me a Facebook message. My tablet is always charged, or I'm on the computer playing games anyways. I had dinner and watched some TV, and by the time it was 8, my phone was dead. So I threw it on the nightstand. So I do have to look for it at a later time. So I went about my night and played a couple rounds of Call of Duty Black Ops 3 before deciding to go to bed around 1 or 1:30. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper, and I'm not one to wake up unless my alarm goes off in the morning. But at around 3 o'clock, my alarm did go off, and I found it strange. Why would I have the alarm set off to go at 3? I didn't think too much of it, so I laid back in bed, and I was just about to shut my eyes, when all of a sudden, my phone started ringing and two things came to mind when that happened. One, the ringtone was not one that I had on for incoming calls, and the other one, obviously being that I knew my phone was dead. I opened my eyes and I can see the brightness of my screen on the wall, so I know I wasn't imagining things. I had a cold chill run down my back as I turned around to reach for my phone to see who was calling. It was no one, and I don't mean an unknown number. I mean it was a white screen with only the slide to answer or decline buttons on the screen. I was already awake and afraid, so whether or not I answered the call didn't matter. I picked up and hesitated to put the phone to my ear. I said hello, and didn't get response, so I said hello again. And I could hear a faint whisper, but couldn't make out the words. Then I heard a laughter that chilled me to the bone, and it startled me that I dropped my phone. Just as it hit the bed, I could hear this sinister laughter coming out from my speakers, and behind its laughter, I heard screaming. I couldn't move, and I'm not sure how long it lasted, but it felt like minutes before it all stopped. Screen turned off, and my room was dark again. Only the red glow from my alarm clock was illuminating my room. I was still shocked looking at my phone the whole time without blinking. I reached to grab my phone, and the first thing I did was try and turn it on. Nothing like I said, I knew my phone was dead. So I turned my bedroom light on and plugged in my phone. I went back to bed, and in the morning, I turned my phone on and I checked my calls. Nothing. I can't explain it, but I do hope someone has a similar experience happen to them. This was a while ago, and I was living in Mexico at the time. It happened when I was 15 years old, and it's an experience I won't forget. My family and I had been looking for a place to live, and we were fortunate enough that my aunt had a friend who was renting out the bottom part of her home. It had its own kitchen and bathroom, and also a separate entrance. So we had moved in, and it seemed weird, but I never liked how the place felt. I always had a negative vibe about it. It wasn't long before strange things started happening at that place. Things like the faucet turning on full blast without anyone being home, and we saw it running while we were out. Our first thought was maybe it was the owner playing a trick on us for whatever reason. Other occurrences would include things going missing and then reappearing right where they were last. Knocking on the bedroom doors, and this one time while watching TV, the volume went from a decent set all the way to max, and not gradually like the TV is supposed to do, but it just jumped all of a sudden, much like I did when it happened. Now this one night though is really scary. Now my parents had their room, and my brothers and I shared the one just down the hall. It was storming, and we had the windows open. My brothers and I went to bed, and after a while, finally went to sleep. At about 3 or 4 in the morning, I was woken up by a large crash from within the room. It sounded like a bookshelf falling over and hitting the floor. I jolted up, and there was nothing there. Amazingly though, both my brothers were asleep, and I at least knew my older brother was for sure, because he snores and snores really loud. It took me a while to calm down and try to rationalize what that sound was. Maybe it was just thunder from outside, I thought to myself. Anyways, as I was finally settling down and ready to go back to bed, I heard a faint whistle coming from outside the window, and it was getting closer and closer. Now let you tell me though, that window faces nothing but a cement wall, and if that's not creepy enough, the storm I thought had stopped, because all I could hear was the whistling at that moment. But it was still raining, and I could still see the lightning flashing in through the window. It lasted for what felt like minutes before the whistling finally stopped, and I could hear the rain and thunder. I did nothing about it. I didn't wake my parents or siblings, I just laid in bed till I was able to go back to sleep. I know, so dumb, but I was scared and a kid. The next morning though, my dad did tell us that he came to wake us up after he had made breakfast. But when he got to our door, it was slightly open, but it closed on him. He tried to open it thinking we were playing, but he got mad and told us he was banging on the door, yelling, "Let me in." Now, we didn't hear him, we were fast asleep. He told us that he started to push on the door and he felt as if someone was pushing back. My dad finally got tired and so he rammed the door open, and of course, we didn't hear him still when he rushed in managing to open the door. He saw us fast asleep and under the covers. There was no way it was any of us. My wife told me that when she was around 8 years old, she had started having several paranormal happenings in her bedroom. Like, her toys would be nicely put away in a toy chest, specifically her dolls, before she'd go to bed every night. And when she'd wake up, her dolls would be in a row sitting in an upright position, facing her bed. If that wasn't creepy enough, she said that it would escalate and was able to hear footsteps running across her floor. When she turned her head to see what the noise was, there was nothing. Now, this was just the beginning, too. Whatever this entity was, it made itself more known. This happened for about 2 more years, and she had moved about 2 more times in that span of time. Like I said, stranger things started to happen to her. One of the more astonishing ones was, when she'd be playing at the park, waiting to be picked up by her mother, she was usually the last kid around. She started to notice the park equipment would be moving, the swings in particular, with no breeze or kids around. It was just plain weird seeing the swing move back and forth, as if there was a kid on it. Not long after the park equipment moved by themselves, she started to see a little girl, following her, or so she thought. My wife had never seen her before, and she wasn't scared by any means by the little girl. The girl, she said, was not ghostly looking, and I could see her clearly, she told me. The only thing was that the girl would always be hidden behind something, peeking around the corner or just far away from my wife. So one day, she decided to try and talk to this little girl. She saw her at the playground this time and walked towards the little girl. As she moved closer and closer, the girl would start to hide herself behind the playground, and my wife kept calling to her, saying, "Did you want to play with me?" With no response back, and the girl moving away from her, she just gave up and went on with her day. My wife finally told me how she knew that the little girl was a ghost. My wife was walking home from the park, and she noticed the little girl in the strangest place, that was sitting on top of a light post. How is that even possible? It was the strangest thing ever, and every day after that, she would see her on rooftops and light posts, and just the most peculiar places. It's been years, but now that my wife is older, she says she can hear little footsteps around the house, and the giggle of a little girl whenever she's alone. I've done research on my house and the area I live in, and sure, people die all the time. I haven't found horrible deaths that have happened in or around my home, so I do assume it has to be me who's being haunted, but it's not every day. It happens every once in a while, but it mostly happens when I'm alone and my wife and daughters are not home. I have a man cave in my basement, and that's where I spend most of my time when the wife and kids aren't home. Now, they have very thin flooring, so you can hear a pin drop from upstairs. I mean, there's nothing you can't hear from downstairs. Anyways, this last time that I was alone, I was really freaked out. I was alone watching TV with my dog, when all of a sudden, my dog, who was laying on my lap, got off and went to the stairs and just sat down looking up. This wasn't weird. She does it every time she hears someone at the door, so I half expected a knock at my door or the doorbell. Nothing happened, so I paid no attention to it. So I called my dog over, but she looked at me and looked back at the stairs, so that started to raise some alarms. But again, I chose to ignore it. As I started to turn the volume back up on my TV, I heard a loud bang from upstairs, and my dog got up and started barking up a storm. I got up off the couch and told her to be quiet, trying to calm her down. I picked her up and put her on the couch, and although she stopped barking, she just kept growling and looking towards the stairs. I wasn't scared, so I went up and checked to see what the hell that noise was. And as I went past the kitchen and into the living room, I noticed my kid's bin of toys was dumped over, and the toys were scattered all over the place. I was a little scared by this point. This bin was heavy, and not only that, the bin was up against a wall in the living room. and yet some of the toys were even down the hall by my daughter's room. That made no sense, so I quickly picked up all the toys and put everything back in the toy bin. I went downstairs, and as I got to the couch, I heard footsteps coming from the kids' room. But it wasn't one set, it was multiple feet running back and forth. It was at this point where I really felt a chill down my back. So instead of sitting down, I had to make sure there wasn't an intruder in my home. Of course, this wasn't possible. My home alarm was set, so I knew nobody could have been in my house. As I made my way to the stairs again, I got to the first step and the running stopped. But there's a door that blocks the basement to the main floor, and it slammed. It opened quickly and slammed shut. I froze, and this is where it truly got frightened. All of a sudden, I could hear footsteps running down the stairs, and I was at the bottom. Although I didn't see anything, I definitely felt a rush of cold air hit me. This wasn't a light breeze, but it quickly and hard almost pushed me back. I didn't have the balls to go up, so I just got back to my couch, turned the volume up on the TV, and tried to ignore what had happened. I later went back upstairs to check all the doors and windows to make sure everything was secure. So this happened to me when I was about 13 or 14 years old back in Mexico. It was at my aunt's house. To get a better understanding of this story, you first need to know the layout of my aunt's house. It's a 2-story house with 2 bedrooms upstairs and a washroom. There are stairs that go downstairs, but you have to go outside to the stairs to the yard and into the back door of the house. Not the best design by any means. When you open the upstairs door to go out, if you look to your right, there's a small edge of the roof that you can walk along to get to the other side of the bedroom and onto the roof of the house. This ledge also runs along the other side of the room, but the cement is broken down, and if you were to step on it, you would fall. And there's nothing to hold on to either. Nobody walks on that side of the roof. I'm about 6 foot tall now, and there's a window on the broken side of the roof that's still about 5 inches above the top of my head. This is important. So now that you have a somewhat good idea of the layout, hopefully I can continue with my experience. It was about 2 or 2:30 a.m. and I had to go to the washroom, so I got up, headed there and did my business, and I was headed back to bed. And I suddenly had a strange feeling of being watched from the window. I froze and slowly turned my head towards the window, and there I saw a man at the window. He was an older man, I'd say 50 to 55 years old if I had to guess. It was as clear as day, lighter skinned with a fancy moustache and black hair. He was also wearing a cowboy hat, and it didn't click at that moment that there was no way this guy was that tall, or the fact that it was impossible for him to be standing on the broken side of the roof. He didn't notice me though, and he kept walking. I lost sight of him after we went past the window, and he walked around to the other side of the roof, where there was like a big bay window. You could see the whole roof on that side, and the top of the neighbours as well. There was no mistaking, there was a solid-figured man standing on the roof. Then I noticed something else. He was holding a trumpet. And as I noticed it, he raised the trumpet to his lips to start playing it. I could see his fingers moving and his cheeks puffed, and it looked like he was playing it, but there was no sound. I didn't hear a thing. It felt like minutes of me standing just looking at him playing the trumpet, the length of a regular song. He finished playing, turned to look at me, smiled and started walking off the roof. I could see him clearly as he was walking on air. As he kept walking, he started to fade out with every step, starting from his feet to his head, and he was gone. I was so shocked. Not scared, just shocked. I went back to bed. The next morning, I told my mom that at the breakfast table, my aunt and cousins were there too. And as I told her what I had seen last night, my aunt got up from the table, not sure where she went. My aunt walked back in and she was holding a painting of the man I had seen. I jumped out of my chair because it startled me. She asked if it was the man you saw. I said yes. She then proceeded to tell me that this painting was of my uncle's father who died 20 years ago. I asked her where she got the painting from, and she said it was stored away with some of his stuff. My aunt also mentioned that he would love to play the trumpet for his kids, and that she also had that stored away with the painting. There's an old abandoned hospital in Edmonton called Charles Campsell Hospital, and this happened to myself, my older brother, I'll call him Omar, and a couple of our friends. I was 18 at the time, and we had gone ghost hunting this one fortnight, and we had gone to a cemetery that night, hoping to see something. And we spent about an hour or so there when one of our friends said that there was this hospital nearby, and said that it was reported to be very haunted. We were getting nothing at the cemetery, so we said sure, why not? It was still early. It was like 1:30 a.m. So we made our way to the hospital. My brother Omar drove there, and it was about 5 minutes away. We pulled up to the hospital, and it was fenced off with no trespassing signs posted all over. Now, I don't condone trespassing anywhere. Make sure you get proper permission before doing any ghost hunts. But we were young and dumb, so yeah. Anyway, when we pulled up and got out of the car, we walked along the fence to see if we could get in somehow. That's when we heard some voices coming from the front entrance of the hospital, so we ducked down and silenced our voices. It was a bunch of teens roughly the same age as us who were being escorted out of the place by security. I'd imagine they've had vandals and teens looking for a thrill inside the hospital, so they had security patrolling the area and checking inside the hospital too. It was 2 security guards escorting them out, and they walked them back to their vehicle. We thought this was a great opportunity to get in, without security for a while, and an open space not 5 feet from us. So we quickly went through the small hole and went in. This place was spooky, and it's dark. We had flashlights, obviously, and we headed through the main entrance and decided to go through the hospital floor by floor, starting from the basement. We went through with nothing happening, and it was pretty much a bust. Locked doors to some areas, and we were sure security would be coming around again soon. But before we left, Omar suggested we try one more floor up, and we agreed to it. Why the hell not, right? So we went up, and Omar didn't have a flashlight. It was dark and hard to see, but with the city lights and the moon illuminating inside a little, it was somewhat possible to walk around without a flashlight. He took the lead, being the oldest in the group. We followed behind with our flashlights when we all heard giggling. It was faint, but we all heard it. We stood still to see if we could hear it again. We all heard it again, same giggle, but it was more audible. It had to be a child, and we were getting a little freaked out. When all of a sudden, I saw Omar dart straight down the hall. I ran behind him, and I asked him, "Omar, what the hell?" And he said, "I saw someone at the end of the hallway." I told him to slow down for some reason. I felt uncomfortable about this situation. I don't know what it was, but something wasn't right. Omar was wearing a hoodie that night, lucky for him. I caught up to him and I grabbed him by the hoodie and pulled him back, dropping him to the floor because I had seen something in front of him that he must not have seen for whatever reason. "Dude, what gives?" he yells at me. And I said, "Omar, look." And I shone the flashlight about 2 feet in front of him. And right in the path he was headed was a big hole in the middle of this cross section where it leads to other corridors. He got up and we stepped closer to the edge, and it was a straight shot down to the basement, and we were several floors up. Now I know it was the basement because it was completely flooded at the time, and I threw a stone or a piece of cement down the hole just to see how far down it went, and sure enough, we heard a splash at the end. After the stone hit the water, Omar and I heard a giggle again, and we looked up from the hole, and sure enough, on the other side of this massive hole was what I would say looked to be the figure of a little girl. And just as quickly as she was there, she was gone. Just gone. Again, I had my flashlight, and I shone it in the direction of the little girl, but there was nothing. Just a corridor with some hospital beds. That's it. This happened to me about 4 years ago. I was coming home from work one day. It was around 6 or 6:30, and here in Canada in the winter months, it's nighttime at this point. I was driving home. Street lights are on and nothing unusual, except as I was leaving work, I saw what looked to me like a little boy in my rear-view mirror, about, I'd say, 50 feet behind me, in the middle of the parking lot. I didn't pay any attention to it, and as I was driving home, I saw the same kid, or at that point, I thought it was a different kid about 3 blocks from where my work is, and he was just staring at me as I drove by. I had a slight chill, and I try not to think much of it, but it was creepy. I only live about 7 minutes from my work, so it doesn't take me long to get back home. I didn't see him again until I was about 2 blocks away. This time, he was under a street lamp, so I got a better look at this kid, and to my surprise, it was not a kid at all. In Mexico, we call these creatures duendes. They're usually small, fairy-like creatures with the appearance of an old man. Their heights vary, but I myself have never seen one to be the size of a child. He looked exactly like an old man as I drove past him, about to turn the corner. I was freaking out at this point, and I just wanted to get home. This thing was following me. As I was on approach to turn the last corner of my house, there he was again. I slammed on my brakes because there it was, right in front of my car, just crossing the street. It looked up at me as he was walking past my car and gave me the most evil grin I'd ever seen. I was about ready to run him over with my car, but I was frozen in place. As soon as he was on the other side of the street, I gunned it home. But I took one final glance in my rear-view mirror to see if he was still behind me. It was gone. It wasn't on the other side of the street or anything. I didn't care, but I was so frightened. I got home, got out of my car, and looked around to see if it was nearby. I was fortunate enough not to see him again. I made sure to look down the street both ways before going into my house. I locked the door, closed the curtain, and tried to forget what I saw, even though my wife knew something had spooked me. I didn't tell her the following day. I didn't want to scare her at that time. I hope I don't see it again.